He writes this thing saying, you know, Jane Seymour loves to run naked through tall grass. And
for decades, Jane Seymour captivated the world with her grace, her poise, and an image of effortless perfection. She was the embodiment of timeless beauty, a woman who seemed untouched by the struggles that plagued so many of her Hollywood peers. But was that polished exterior just a carefully constructed illusion? Beneath the dazzling red carpets and the adoring press, was there another story? One she spent a lifetime hiding? Because behind that elegant smile, there were whispers. Whispers of heartbreak, of betrayal, of a career that wasn't always hers to control. She was Hollywood's darling, but at what cost? She fought to keep her place in an industry that discards women the moment their youth begins to fade. She battled behind closed doors, where contracts weren't just inked on paper, but chains that kept her locked in a role she could never escape. And the world never knew until now. For years, the truth remained buried. A devastating betrayal by someone she trusted, a dark period that nearly shattered her, a secret feud that left scars she never spoke about. But at 73, Jane Seymour is finally ready to reveal what we all suspected. And what she has to say, it will change everything we thought we knew about her. Before the world knew her as the beloved actress, Jane Seymour was just a girl with a dream, but that dream came with an unexpected cost. She wasn't born Jane Seymour. She was Joyce Penelope Wilhelmina Frankenberg, a name as grand as it was unwieldy. But in the world she was about to enter, her identity wasn't hers to keep. Raised in England by a strict, disciplined father who worked as a medical professional, her childhood was one of order and expectation. While her father saw logic and structure as the keys to success, Jane was different. She longed for something beyond the confines of the life set before her. From an early age, she was drawn to performance, mesmerized by the idea of becoming someone else, someone the world would never overlook. But in the cold, unforgiving reality of show business, ambition alone was never enough. She was young, eager, and determined. But the industry was merciless. She was too foreign for some roles and too delicate for others. Casting directors dismissed her, telling her she lacked the edge, the presence, and the uniqueness to be remembered. Even as she refined her craft, even as she fought to prove she belonged, one thing stood in her way: her name. Joyce Frankenberg was never going to be a leading lady in Hollywood. She was too difficult to brand and too unfamiliar to audiences. And just like that, her identity, her very name, was stripped from her, replaced with something elegant, something marketable, something that wasn't her. Jane Seymour. It was inspired by a long-dead queen, but for her it was something else entirely, a warning. If she wanted success, if she wanted to be seen, she had to become someone new. The industry didn't just demand talent, it demanded transformation. And this was only the beginning of the sacrifices she would be forced to make. But changing her name wasn't enough. There were whispers, casting agents who scoffed at her mixed heritage, who told her she didn't fit the mold of the perfect English beauty. She wasn't British enough, yet not exotic enough to be something else. She existed in between, and in Hollywood, there was no room for in between. She was told to alter her looks, to soften her features, to become the kind of woman they could sell to audiences. She watched as others were handed opportunities that never came her way, and the unspoken truth lingered: she would always have to work twice as hard to be seen as equal. Still, she refused to give up. She took on whatever work she could, appearing in minor productions, struggling to make an impression in an industry that barely noticed her. The rejections mounted, but she kept pushing, desperate for a chance to prove herself. And then, when she least expected it, fate intervened. It was a chance encounter, a meeting that seemed harmless at first, but in Hollywood, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. An opportunity arose, one that could finally open the doors she had been banging on for years. It seemed like luck, like the break she had been waiting for. But was it? Or was she walking into something far more dangerous than she realized? Her big break was just around the corner, but Hollywood had plans for Jane Seymour that she never saw coming. It was the role that changed everything. Jane Seymour, a name that once meant nothing in Hollywood, was suddenly on everyone's lips. Solitaire, the mysterious and alluring Bond girl in Live and Let Die, became an overnight sensation. The industry had finally taken notice. But what seemed like a dream was, in reality, a trap, one that would follow her for the rest of her career. Because in Hollywood, being a Bond girl wasn't just a title, it was a label, and labels were dangerous. They were glamorous, yes, coveted even, but they were also disposable. For decades, the women who played alongside James Bond were seen as accessories, beautiful distractions meant to entertain before being replaced in the next film. And Jane Seymour knew this. She knew that despite the fame, despite the adoration, she was already on borrowed time. She tried to resist. She refused to fade into the background, determined to prove that she was more than just a fleeting Hollywood fantasy. Instead of chasing the next typical leading lady role, she took a different path, starring in films and television projects that showcased her depth as an actress. Somewhere in Time was unlike anything she had done before, a sweeping, romantic epic that demanded emotional vulnerability rather than just physical beauty. And East of Eden allowed her to show a dramatic intensity that few expected from someone who had been introduced to the world in a Bond film. But success was never that simple. With every role she fought for, the industry pushed back. No matter how much critical praise she received, no matter how much she proved her talent, Hollywood still saw her as one thing, the woman who had once played a Bond girl. And the price of that label? It was suffocating. Producers still wanted her to be exotic, delicate, and untouchable. They wanted her to be beautiful but not too commanding, sensual but not too strong. They expected her to stay frozen in time, forever the young ingenue they had once cast. But Jane was changing. She was evolving, growing into something more complex, more powerful, and the industry didn't like that. The pressure was relentless. Publicly, she was adored and praised for her poise, her elegance, and her seemingly effortless transition into serious roles. But behind the scenes, it was a different story. Studios were hesitant. They worried she was moving too far from what made her marketable. Agents warned her that taking too many risks could end her career before it even truly began. And then there were the whispers, the unspoken truth that no one dared say to her face, that she would never really break free, that no matter what she did, no matter how much she proved herself, she would always be fighting an uphill battle, because in Hollywood, some roles follow you forever. Fame had finally found her, but it came with an unwritten contract, one that would haunt her for years. Hollywood had given Jane Seymour fame, but it came with a price she would pay for the rest of her career. She was adored, admired, and placed on a pedestal, yet, beneath the praise was an unspoken truth. The industry never saw her as more than a perfect, polished image, a delicate English rose, a beauty to be admired, but never a force to be reckoned with. And the moment she dared to challenge that perception, the battle truly began. Directors and producers wanted her to be soft-spoken, graceful, and compliant. She was the woman they could mold into whatever version of femininity Hollywood needed her to be. The demure love interest, the refined aristocrat, the woman who stood beside a man, never in front of him. And as long as she played the part, the doors remained open. But Jane had other ambitions. She wanted depth, complexity, roles that went beyond the surface, roles that showed the full range of human emotion, and for that, she was punished. No matter how much she proved herself, no matter how many critically acclaimed performances she delivered, the industry refused to let go of the idea they had built around her. Casting agents dismissed her for roles that required grit, passion, or darkness. She was too elegant, they said, too refined, a backhanded compliment that was, in reality, a locked door. And behind those doors, decisions were being made without her. Hollywood wasn't just an industry, it was a machine, and Jane, like so many before her, was expected to move within it without question. The men in charge dictated which roles she would take, how she would be marketed, and how her career would unfold. If she spoke up, if she pushed back, she was labeled difficult, and in an industry built on control, difficult women didn't last long. Rumors began to spread, whispers that she was ungrateful, that she was making demands. Studios grew hesitant. The same industry that had once embraced her was slowly turning cold, and there were darker forces at play. She had seen it happen to others. Women who had refused to conform, who had stepped outside the lines drawn for them, suddenly found themselves without work. Was it a coincidence, or was there something more sinister happening behind the scenes? And yet, the real betrayal wasn't just coming from Hollywood, because while she was fighting to maintain her career, something far more personal was slipping through her fingers. Behind the scenes, her personal life was unraveling in ways the cameras never captured. Hollywood had given Jane Seymour everything: fame, wealth, admiration. But there was one thing it could never provide: real love. She had spent her career playing women who found their happy endings, who fell into the arms of devoted men, who walked away with a love that lasted a lifetime. But behind the scenes, her own story was much darker. Her first marriage was supposed to be forever. Like so many young actresses, she had clung to the idea that love could be her escape, that, away from the cameras, she could find the stability she had always longed for. But love, much like Hollywood, had its illusions. It didn't take long for cracks to form, for the pressures of fame and ambition to pull them apart. And when it ended, it wasn't just a loss, it was devastation, a failure she carried with her, one that would set the stage for a pattern that would repeat throughout her life. Because Jane Seymour was a woman who wanted to believe in love, even when it betrayed her. Her second marriage promised hope, a fresh start, a new chapter, but it came with something far more sinister than she had ever expected. At first, it was subtle, a shift in control, a sense that her success wasn't entirely her own. And then it became undeniable. The man she had trusted with her heart was also the man who was dismantling her career from the inside. He controlled the finances, the deals, the decisions. And when the marriage finally crumbled, she was left with more than just heartbreak. She was left with nothing. A woman who had worked for everything was suddenly on the verge of financial ruin, betrayed by the very person who had once vowed to protect her. She had been America's sweetheart, but behind closed doors, her love life was nothing like the fairy tales she had portrayed on screen. There was no rescue, no grand romantic gestures, only lessons learned the hard way. And yet, despite it all, she carried herself with grace. She refused to let the world see the scars, the loneliness, the weight of so many failed relationships. She smiled for the cameras, kept up appearances, and played the role they expected of her. Until one incident nearly broke her completely. Hollywood had turned on her. The industry she had given everything to had begun to see her as irrelevant. Her personal life was falling apart, the betrayals piling up one after another, and just when she thought things couldn't get worse, the darkest chapter of her life began. The world saw Jane Seymour as the embodiment of elegance, poised, refined, and untouchable. The media clung to her image as a timeless beauty, a woman who had somehow defied Hollywood's brutal aging standards. But what they didn't see, what no one outside her inner circle truly understood, was that behind the glamour, she was unraveling. Because while the cameras captured her grace, her reality was far from picture perfect. Beneath the polished exterior, she was drowning in financial devastation. Years of success, of carefully managing a career that had once seemed indestructible, were crumbling in front of her. It wasn't just a bad investment or a rough patch, it was complete financial ruin. A business decision, one she had trusted, one that was supposed to secure her future, had backfired in the worst possible way. And suddenly, the woman who had once been Hollywood's golden girl had nothing. The betrayal was more than just financial, it was personal. She had relied on the wrong people and placed her faith in promises that were nothing more than illusions. And when the truth came out, the damage was irreversible. Her accounts were empty, her assets were slipping through her fingers. Jane Seymour, a woman who had once commanded millions at the box office, was now teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. And the tabloids pounced. The very same media that had once celebrated her now ripped her apart. Headlines painted her as desperate, a woman past her prime, clinging to a career that no longer wanted her. The whispers began, was this the end of Jane Seymour? Had she fallen so far that she would never recover? Hollywood, the industry she had given everything to, had no sympathy. It had moved on. There were younger stars, newer faces, and fresh talent ready to take her place. When she needed Hollywood the most, when she reached out for the same system she had spent decades serving, she was met with silence. Directors who had once courted her wouldn't return her calls. Studios that had built projects around her name were no longer interested. Jane Seymour was, in their eyes, finished. But that wasn't the worst of it. Because in Hollywood, when a woman starts to slip, the rumors begin. And they weren't just about her career, they were about her personal life. Whispers of affairs, of scandals lurking beneath the surface. Some claimed she was involved in high-profile romances, using connections to claw her way back into relevance. Others suggested revenge, that she was bitter, angry, and out for blood against the industry that had abandoned her. It didn't matter that none of it was true. In Hollywood, perception is everything, and perception had turned against her. She had lost everything, but Jane Seymour wasn't ready to fade away. Jane Seymour had spent decades building a career that once seemed untouchable. She had been a household name, an actress who graced magazine covers, starred in hit films, and lived a life millions envied. But now, she was facing a reality that every woman in Hollywood dreads: irrelevance. With the industry turning its back on her, she had no choice but to take whatever roles she could. She wasn't being offered the glamorous lead parts anymore. The days of playing the love interest, the sought-after star, were gone. Instead, she was pushed into minor supporting roles, forgettable made-for-TV movies, and guest appearances on shows that barely made an impact. For someone who had once commanded the screen, it was humiliating. Pietro gli aurici sinolice, chitarrie e Gio, but she had bills to pay, a career to salvage, a name to protect. She had witnessed it before, how Hollywood discards women as they age. It wasn't about talent. It wasn't about hard work. It was about the industry's obsession with youth, and no amount of grace, beauty, or charm could fight the inevitable. Once, she had been the woman they built films around. Now, she was being asked to play the mother, the grandmother, the background character in stories that barely acknowledged her. And as if that wasn't enough, the years had taken their toll. Decades of relentless pressure, grueling schedules, and personal betrayals had left their mark. She was exhausted. The emotional scars of her failed marriages, the financial ruin that had nearly destroyed her, and the constant battle to prove she still mattered, all weighed on her. And then came the physical toll, the injuries, the surgeries, the signs of a body that had spent too many years being pushed beyond its limits. She had been fighting for so long, but now her health was betraying her. She refused to let it end like this. If Hollywood wouldn't give her the roles she deserved, she would create her path. She turned to entrepreneurship, launching a lifestyle brand, writing books, and sharing her wisdom with the world. It was an attempt to reinvent herself, to step outside the Hollywood machine and find a new purpose. But the damage had already been done. Her name, once a symbol of prestige, had been diminished by years of struggles, scandals, and the industry's neglect. And then, the whispers began. Was she finished? Would she ever return to the spotlight? Or was she planning to disappear forever, to retire quietly and accept the fate Hollywood had decided for her? But Jane Seymour had one more revelation, one that would shock everyone who had ever doubted her. At 73, Jane Seymour finally broke her silence. The woman who had spent decades maintaining an image of elegance, resilience, and quiet grace had something to confess, something the world never expected to hear. She had played the roles, smiled through the pain, and survived the cruel, relentless machine of Hollywood. But now, she was done pretending. For years, she had been the woman who had it all: beauty, fame, success. But what no one ever saw was how much she had lost along the way. The marriages that crumbled into heartbreak, the betrayals left her questioning everything. The career had been carefully shaped by forces beyond her control, molding her into what Hollywood needed her to be, never what she truly was. And now, she was ready to tell the truth. Hollywood, she admitted, had never really been on her side. It had used her, placed her on a pedestal, and discarded her when she no longer fit their vision of perfection. She had fought against the system, but in the end, the system had won. She had been forced to reinvent herself time and time again, not because she wanted to, but because she had no choice. In an industry obsessed with youth, she had learnt the hard way that no woman, no matter how talented, could escape the inevitable. But Jane Seymour was never one to simply fade away. She had been knocked down, humiliated, abandoned, and yet she was still standing. That, she revealed, was her greatest victory. Not the awards, not the accolades, but the fact that she had survived, that she had refused to let Hollywood define her, even when it tried to erase her. And as for love, that was the greatest illusion of all. She had spent her life searching for something real, something lasting, but in the end she had come to understand a painful truth. Love, as she had imagined it, was nothing more than another carefully crafted story, the kind she had played in films, the kind that audiences believed in. But in real life, love was something else entirely, something fleeting, something that more often than not came with conditions. For the first time, Jane Seymour laid bare the regrets she had carried for years, the moments she wished she could change, the choices she wished she had made differently. But she also made one thing clear: she wasn't ashamed of any of it. Because everything she had endured, every loss, every setback, had made her who she was, a woman who had defied expectations, a woman who had learned how to rebuild from nothing, a woman who, against all odds, had refused to be forgotten. But in the end, her story is more than just one of heartbreak. It's one of resilience, reinvention, and an unforgettable legacy. Was Jane Seymour ever truly appreciated for her talent? Or was she just another casualty of Hollywood's ruthless obsession with youth and beauty? The industry had celebrated her and placed her on a pedestal, and for years she played the part they wanted her to play. But when the spotlight began to dim, when time did what it does to every actress in Hollywood, she was faced with a painful reality. Her worth in the industry had never been about her talent. It had been about something far more fragile. And yet, despite everything, she endured. She outlasted the fleeting fame, the betrayals, the financial ruin. She proved that she was more than just a face on a movie poster. And in doing so, she became something greater than just an actress. She became an example. A woman who refused to be erased. A woman who challenged the system and tried to discard her. Her influence stretched far beyond the films she starred in. She inspired generations of actresses who refused to be defined by Hollywood's impossible expectations. Women who saw her struggle, her resilience, and realized that they didn't have to disappear when the industry told them to. She had once been forced to change her name to fit into Hollywood's mold, but in the end, she made sure the name Jane Seymour stood for something. And there is a lesson to be learned from her story, a brutal, undeniable truth about fame. It gives, it takes, it promises eternity but rarely delivers. The applause always fades, the admiration turns to whispers, and Hollywood, as it always does, moves on. The price of fame is high, and for women in the industry, that price is even higher. But Jane Seymour never let Hollywood write her ending. They may have cast her aside, counted her out, and whispered that her time was over, but in the end, she proved them all wrong. Because Jane Seymour's story is proof that Hollywood can make you and just as easily break you. But in the end, she wrote her final chapter. If you love bold, untold Hollywood stories, subscribe to Sarana for more gripping exposés. Don't just watch, dive into the truth.